Hello everybody and welcome to week 2. Please review in detail all the elements of module 2 before starting to complete the assignments. We'll talk about those in part 2 of the videos announcements that will set up module 2. But first I wanted to talk a little bit about our topic for this week, culture. So what is culture? Culture refers to the beliefs, values, behavior, and material objects that form a people's way of life. Culture is transmitted through language and symbols. The beliefs and values of a culture are the basis for social rules that determine what people should and should not do. The term for these social rules is norm. Social norms are both formal and informal. We'll talk about these a little more in a minute. Let's look at some of the elements of culture. All cultures, including our own, have 5 components: symbols, language, values and beliefs, norms, and material culture. This is technology. And by technology, we're talking about any way that human beings physically manipulate their environment. The invention of the wheel, for example, or the discovery that fire could be used to cook food are examples of technology, not just laptops and widescreen TVs. Let's talk about each of these in turn for a moment before we get to the topic at hand that we're going to discuss a little bit in Module 2, Subcultures. First, let's look at symbols. Symbols are defined as anything that carries a particular meaning, recognized by people who share a culture. The meaning of the same symbols varies from society to society, and of course, we can know the meaning and not agree about some of the permutations of the meaning, as the current NFL take a knee protests is emblematic of. This American flag is a symbol, so is the bald eagle. So symbols are a larger cultural way that we transmit cultural elements from generation to generation. A subset of culture is language, the system of symbols that allows people to communicate with one another. It can be either written, spoken, or both. Language is how we transmit culture from one generation to the other. We perceive the world through language. The Sapir-Whorf thesis is that we perceive the world through our cultural lens. Let me provide an example of language. And for those of you Arabic speakers, apologies for the pronunciation in advance. How many words for sandstorm, for example, are there in the English language? We probably just have 1. In Arabic cultures, though, where there is more of, there are more desert environments, for example, they have different words for sandstorms depending on what kind of a sandstorm it is. There's Aj, which is a really powerful sandstorm, or habub, an average run-of-the-mill sandstorm that might happen regularly. We determine what is valuable through a cultural lens. One of the elements, or 2 of the elements of culture that we talk about in our definition of culture are values and beliefs. Values are culturally defined standards by which people judge desirability, goodness, beauty, justice, and they serve as broad guidelines for social living, while beliefs are specific statements that people hold to be true. For example, we think of robbery as probably a bad thing. Right? That's a belief. That's an American belief. Don't steal from your neighbor. Right? So Robin S. Williams was a preeminent American sociologist who defined these core American values: equal opportunity, achievement and success, material comfort, activity and work, practices, practicability and efficiency, progress, science, democracy and enterprise, and freedom. More specifically, we turn our values and beliefs into rules, social rules by which we live. Social rules are called norms. These norms are serious, mores, or based in social custom, folkways. These norms are reflections of our cultural values. A more, for example, would carry serious moral significance. Don't commit adultery or murder, for example. People often hold the 10 Commandments up as an example of a set of mores, or serious social rules. There are also informal norms, or folkways. For example, we don't tend to eat salad with our hands. We use a fork. There's no law against eating salad with your hands, but you might think it bizarre if someone who you invited to dinner decided to do that. These formal norms or mores, some of which are so serious that they're defined as such and they become law. There's also an aspect of culture we need to consider. Values, beliefs, and norms that are society-wide are termed non-material culture. In other words, they're ideas. Material culture, however, reflects a society's values in technology made physical. Now, technology is whatever people apply to manipulate their physical environment in terms of living in their surroundings. Examples include books, buildings, physical objects that future generations can use. That's archaeologists uncover. Your laptop, for example, is an example of material culture. Another example of material culture, however, would be, we have a broader definition of technology than a colloquial one. The discovery of fire and its ability to cook food, for example, is a technology, a human technology. So is the invention of the wheel. Now, for Module 2, we are discussing subcultures. A subculture is any smaller culture that is separate and distinct from the larger culture. It certainly shares some of the same apparatus, basically linguistic transmission, and it can share many of the values, beliefs, or norms of the mainstream culture or go against them. Subculture is a rather broad term. Here are some examples of subculture. Any group which is somehow distinct from the larger culture. Mothers Against Drunk Driving, Log Cabin Republicans, bikers, street gangs, Narcotics Anonymous, LGBT campus activists, pro-life groups, religious groups, hippies, gamers, cosplay enthusiasts. All of these have been defined in one context or another as subcultures. Use the same definition of what distinguishes cultural elements. Each of these groups has beliefs, values, norms, and material culture. So let's think about Module 2 for a moment. In Module 2, we're going to identify positive or negative sanctions that one might be subject to conforming to or violating a social norm. A sanction is a way of enforcing norms. We're also going to explore the concept of cultural beliefs and biases of a chosen subculture. As you work through your assignment for Module 2 and you're reading, think about your subculture that you're going to choose for your discussion and think about how it conforms to or maybe does not conform to the larger culture in which it's embedded. And then we're going to analyze what is happening with a social issue. So let's look at the readings and resources for Module 2 and some of these materials that will help you to get started. First, read Chapter 3, An Introduction to Sociology. And this material, its resource supports module assignments by introducing core sociological concepts related to culture. Please watch the video on video citation and a library guide to APA style. Okay. And there's a supporting resource list. Okay. So let's look for a moment at some of the other elements of Module 2 that you're going to need to take into consideration as we move forward. Okay. First, there's going to be a discussion. Okay. And this discusses culture. Okay. And subculture. Okay. So let's look for a moment at this discussion rubric that will help you to get started. Okay. Your discussion rubric is how you're graded on your discussion. So take a moment, if you're not already doing so, and have a look at that. So we've talked a little bit about what a subculture is, and you will also find references in your text and supporting materials as well. The second assignment or data point that you're going to have to consider for Module 2 is Milestone 1. Let me talk briefly about what milestones are in relation to an SNHU course, and this one is no exception. Final project milestone 1, right, which we'll talk about in a minute, all of these milestones will lead you to elements of your final project. Okay? So each of these milestone assignments, and please go through and review when these milestone assignments are due. If you complete final project milestone 1 successfully, you will then build on that in milestone 2 and so forth until your culmination with your final project. Milestone 1 is your first opportunity to work on an element of your final project. So the more you think of these milestone assignments as elements or components of your final assignment, the easier your final assignment is going to be, or the easier time you'll have putting it together, rather than treating them as separate homework assignments. So let's look at final project milestone 1, topic selection. Okay. You'll identify and summarize a contemporary social issue of your choice. Now let's look at what a social issue is, for example. I had a nice dialogue with one of your fellow students about what a social issue is. C. Wright Mills, whom we discussed in Module 1, was a social theorist in the mid-20th century who is still relevant today. He defined a social issue basically in terms of a social problem, right? So let's look at milestone 1. You can choose from the list below bullying, crime and violence, drug and alcohol abuse, or income inequality and wealth distribution, or you can choose your own topic of an interest to you. So, what is a social issue? Well, a social issue is going to be defined as something that affects a sufficient sufficiently large number of people in society to be defined as such. Let's look at bullying as an example for a moment. Bullying has emerged as a social issue in society. Okay? What does this mean? Well, bullying's been around ever since there were schools, ever since there have been workplaces, two sites where people are bullied and people bully, right? You know, it takes a bullier and a person to be bullied, after all. So, what does this mean? Okay, probably a generation or two ago, and let's think about our 50 to 100 year element that we had in our earlier assignment. Bullying might have been, well, it happens to kids, and it's just part of growing up, and they'll get over it, etc. That's changed. It's become regarded as a serious problem. Okay? With the advent of social media, in the past 12 years, cyberbullying has become a problem too. Okay? So, if a problem is sufficiently large enough to affect not everyone in society, but a large number of people, it becomes a social issue. So you're not only going to refer to your text when you complete this, but please look for supporting resources. Snooze Shapiro Library. There are reference librarians who can help you with topics, and you can find material, academic discussions, as well as discussions in the media. And the Pew Research Center is a wonderful resource where there are surveys that have been conducted over the years which look at just how these social issues are becoming real in our society. So take a minute and click on these links here and here. Then you can also please, if you're selecting your topic from the provided list up here, please reference the supporting resource list handout. This should get you started on Module 2. Again, your discussion and your milestone, your first milestone, the more successful you are in completing this first milestone and of having a discussion with me earlier in the week, the more likely we can work together to ensure your success. Have a great week.